Hello. Welcome to the third conversation on our great experiment. I am so happy to have you here. We have a very exciting conversation and guest today, but before we get into that, I have two exciting announcements. The first of which, I am pleased to announce that Our Great Experiment can now be found on both YouTube and on Spotify. This will hopefully make it more convenient, depending on which medium you prefer, to engage in this conversation. Be sure, if you can, to give us a follow on Spotify and a subscription on YouTube. It helps the platform grow and reach a new audience. The second announcement I want to make is that you may notice on this introduction, the audio quality is a bit better. We've recently upgraded the microphone as well as a new virtual meeting platform with the end goal of hopefully producing a better experience for the listener. Now, I've always thought and truly thought this, that the substance of the conversations is really what matters. So that's what I'm going to continue to put the most effort into. But small changes like this are just a way of continuing to invest in something that we all think is really important. So thank you all for the support. It's been really amazing. Today's guest is Emily Wenning. She's originally from rural North Dakota and went to college in South Dakota to study human services, child development, and political science. She is passionate about human rights and creating a dignified and just living experience for all individuals. She loves to travel and just recently moved back to the United States from living and working in Mexico City. In Mexico, she worked at a migrant and refugee shelter to care for families who were at many different points of the migrant journey, as well as providing translation services and English and Spanish language education. She now works as a bilingual preschool teacher and enjoys hiking, painting, and spending time with her sisters, nephews, and nieces. Emily amazes me with her intelligence, her empathy, and just her overall state of good. I am pleased to share this. I hope you enjoy. Emily Wenning, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Life is busy, but I am so excited to have you on here and to be talking to you and I don't know, trying to be doing something positive in the very dark realm of politics.
This is true. Yes. No, I'm really excited for this. I was really interested when I saw that you posted it on your Instagram. I was like, "Oh, look at him."
Yeah, so I guess, we're still very early on in this stage. You're the third guest I've had the privilege of, talking with and sharing ideas with. But since we're still at this early stage, I figured it's smart to give you and anyone listening a sense of why this even exists because,
Yeah.
what are we doing? Well, um, we live in polarized times. Um,
Mhm.
Working at a university, I see this almost daily, right? How people interact with each other, how people treat each other. And given the events of the past really decade, heightened sense of alarmness, political violence, and the lack of humanity in our conversations about politics, it's a bipartisan issue. It's something that both ends of the American political spectrum struggle with. And I want to be a part of a small change in that. And I am so happy to be starting that with such an awesome guest. Um, so maybe just to start, could you share a little bit about your background and maybe if there are particular political issues or interests that matter to you?
Yeah. So, background, I was originally raised in rural North Dakota, so I was raised by an extremely a fairly conservative family. I would consider pretty much my entire family to be conservative, and I think that that is fairly normal for the area I grew up in. And then I went to college in South Dakota with you, and I studied political science as well as human services, which is kind of like social work. And my focus specifically was on family and childhood development. Um, I've spent some time living not in America, living abroad, I guess you could say. And once was in the middle of college, I did that because I dropped out for a little bit. Because I was originally pre-law, and then I discovered I cry when I fight. So that doesn't really make for a good lawyer. And then this last year I took a year-long volunteer contract in Mexico City, and I was living and working there for a little bit. And I guess political topics that are fairly important to me. I think a lot of my like political, I don't know, thesis and like the root of my politics, I really find it to be a lot about dignity and empathy and creating a, how do I word this? Just kind of creating a equal and dignified life experience for anyone, no matter what kind of like background or circumstances they come from. All of those like tiny little isms that create oppression in our world and that can create a negative life experience. Working on creating like autonomy and dignity for all groups of people, no matter what kind of obstacles that are given to them in this life is probably the way that I would put it in like a neat little package. Obviously, big topics to me then are human rights, education. A lot of those, I guess they would say more like social policies, maybe. Um, so yeah, human rights, education, public health, things like that are all like really important political topics to me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. You know, related issues involving human rights, migration, uh, what's going on in the Middle East, right? Human rights is a big topic in
Yeah.
2025. And I'm curious, when you look to the future, right? The future, not just of the United States, but of the
Mhm.
world and the issues you care about, are there things that give you hope? Or are there particular things that maybe leave you feeling not so hopeful and a bit cautious about what lies ahead?
I think that hope is a really hard thing right now. And I want to say I've been holding on to a lot of things that make me feel hopeful, but it's still a hard thing to live in
Mhm.
when everything is so negative right now. And I will say in terms of the United States, I feel like I've missed a little bit of concept and context for the US right now. I just moved back like a month ago. So I've only been in the US for about a month and a half at this point, I think. So trying to get back into that like context of what the United States is right now and that kind of thing has when only viewing it from an external perspective for a year has been a little interesting. In terms of the world, I would say things that make me feel hopeful. A lot of what I saw via the internet, and also just stuff that I saw living in such a large city. I think Mexico City is like the ninth largest city in the world or something like that, so it's big. Um, is seeing people maybe more our age, like the younger generations, and their openness and interested to being in politics and being a part of, even if it's not necessarily they don't see it as inherently political, into being a part of creating more community around them and being a part of like creating a better world for those around them and for themselves. I saw a lot of people in Mexico that were really dedicated to not only uplifting the communities around them, but at the shelter that I worked at, we received the first 20 Palestinian refugees that have been accepted by Mexico in, gosh, I think it was April. And watching the way like specifically like social work college students would want to come to the shelter, want to like help take these people to their doctor appointments and be their guides and their translators and stuff like that, or make sure that there was a young group of people from the Islamic community in that city that wanted to really like, some of the moms in this group were around our age and they really wanted to like get them involved in the Islamic community and like give them that safe community to be a part of and stuff like that. So seeing the way that our generation really has in certain ways, not in other ways, but in certain ways has really like stepped up to like fill the gaps in community and support where it's needed. That's been really cool. In terms of things that I'm worried about, it's probably a lot of everything. I think that seeing the way that not only violence, but there's like violence in the sense that we think of with like weapons or like physical harm, but violence also just in the sense of policy, violence and the lack of empathy, violence and a lack of not doing something. I consider those to be acts of violence, whether or not they are direct, like using a weapon or your body to hurt someone. That is still violence if you deny someone their right to dignity and their right to an equitable and sustainable life. And so seeing the way that that has been accepted so casually in our world is something that is very concerning to me because I think that desensitization that a lot of us have, whether it's from TikTok, the news, I watch way too much news and I really got to work on cutting some of it out because it's kind of messing with my head a little bit. But just like that desensitization that we all get to like casually accepting violence in our world, I think is a big concern to me.
Yeah, that's
Sorry, that was a lot.
no, no, not at all. This is something, when I had a conversation with Stephen Williams, we talked about a similar topic, right? No generation prior to ours, right? Young people in general, um, no generation has um, been exposed so casually to gruesome videos and content from not just events that occur in the United States, but around the world, right? Healing specifically as an example, right? The conflict in Gaza over the past couple of years, right? Regardless of where, people listening to this might stand on that issue, no one can deny that there's been a lot of video footage and picture image of horrifying stuff. And this does two things, I think. One, it can help spread awareness, certainly, right? In prior, global conflicts, catastrophes, you didn't really know, right? Social media wasn't a thing. It was much easier for things to be concealed.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it can be positive, right? It can bring light to things that we hadn't really had access to before. On the other hand, it can do detrimental things to how we view political opposition when we're
Mm.
so desensitized to all of this stuff going on. It just becomes normalized. And that's a scary thought.
It really is. And I really struggle with finding a balance with this because I would say, especially as someone who has, worked in refugee and migrant work, as someone who has seen a lot of this stuff, not just through the media, but face to face, I really struggle with the idea of not keeping myself up to date and like aware of all the happenings that are going on, or as much as I can with all the happenings that are going on with that, because I do feel like the ability to turn the TV off or turn my phone off and remove myself from it, that's a great privilege that a lot of these people do not have because they're living in it.
Mhm.
And I have the privilege to walk away, to put my phone down. And that's something that's kind of hard to wrap my brain around sometimes. That and the idea that, like, I do think the more access to information that we have in this day and age is good because I mean, at the very least, it sounds a little trivial, I feel like, but the idea that someone is at least bearing witness to what is happening and the reality of what can be going on in this world, I think is important. But also, yeah, I really struggle with the idea that like we consume so much violence in a day, and it is definitely, you can see the impact it has had on this, not just in America, but generally in the world,
Mhm.
on our generation, that it is we're inundated with a lot of violence and horrifying things every day, and there's such like a weird balance of good and bad with that, that I have yet to decide which is the healthier end for me.
Yeah. Um, Kind of shifting focus to a bit more positive experience.
Mhm.
Um, You mentioned that you recently just moved back to the United States. You were doing work supporting migrant and refugee families in Mexico. I want to give you an opportunity to share some of your experience. I mean, you're from rural North Dakota. We
Yeah.
we went to uh, undergrad together in a small town in South Dakota, and then you moved to, I think you said Mexico City's the ninth biggest city in the world.
Yes.
Tell me about this.
Gosh. I think when I first got there, I just literally couldn't comprehend how many people were there. And I say this as someone who's traveled a lot, so it wasn't my first time leaving the country. It wasn't my first time living in a big city. I had lived in Las Vegas before that, but Las Vegas is so small
Hmm.
compared to the sheer amount of everything that is Mexico City. And I will say, like, my first time on public transportation, I was so scared, man. I was like, oh God, there's so many people here. Especially because Mexico City traffic is just like it's built a little different.
Hmm.
It's like a running joke that it's kind of insane there. Because when you get on the train, people like will hold people into the train so that the doors can close and keep them inside instead. And I watched this one lady get herself squeezed in close enough, and then the door closed, but her backpack, because she was so close to the door, that her backpack was stuck outside the door, and the train just went on.
Wow.
So, like, you are here is you, here is the next person next to you on the train. It's a little crazy. But I grew to maybe not love it, but it definitely just became like a very casual part of my day. So yeah, it was very different, a very different way to see the world. Um, speak Reorganizing my whole day around a language that I wasn't that good at speaking yet. No one in my host community, no one in my job spoke English.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of, which I'm so grateful for, because it like really just like threw me in head first into like having to work on my Spanish and make it better. And that was something I really wanted. Um, it did make me very tired, but it was so worth it and I miss it a lot.
It takes like a certain level of like um, bravery to just like take yourself out of like your living situation and just totally do a 180, right? Change it entirely in the pursuit of something good, right? So kudos to you for that.
Thanks, I
But
try.
but immigration is a hot button issue. It's
Yeah.
interesting. So you were not in the United States during the presidential election.
No, I voted absentee.
So as I'm sure you were following, immigration was, maybe the top issue in the economy during the election. And I'm curious, just from your perspective, in these debates about immigration that can be quite contentious, what do you think um, is currently missing from the debate, right? You hear both arguments or, multiple arguments about what the correct immigration policy should be. What do you think's missing from these conversations?
Hmm. That's a very good question because I think a lot is said, but there's not a lot of obviously listening, which I think is just politics in America. They just talk and talk and nobody listens to each other. And I think that that's just how it is. Is it a good thing? No, but like it is the reality. Um, I think for me, something that was kind of drilled into my head by my boss in Mexico City is that the biggest thing is that when it comes to immigration and refugee work, the biggest thing is creating a space where the people we serve have the autonomy to make their own decisions.
Mhm.
Because in the shelter network, a lot of times, like, their daily schedule and, like, things like that is completely like, the ability to decide anything is stripped from them. And some of that is in terms of creating a safe and structured environment for everyone. So, like, we eat at this time, we do this at this time, we do this at this time. If it's a religious one, it's like we pray and worship at this time. Things like that, that their self-autonomy is stripped from them. And so creating a space where it's like, well, I wanna take my kids to go to the park. I want to take my kids to go to the store. I want to go do this thing, but I can't because of this being imposed on me. That's a really hard mindset for them to get out of, and creating a space where they really get that autonomy back into their lives and remember that they are the ones who get to make decisions for themselves. I think that we in America tend to have this idea of like, on the right, it's this idea that like they're all insane criminals that are coming to kill us. And on the left, it's like this idea that um they're all angels and they're all helpless and we need to save them. And things like that, that just like, I mean, obviously that was a grand generalization and there is
Mm.
many shades of nuance in between. But I think that these are the two main ideas that are pushed by the media. Um and I think no one's really creating an avenue where they can make a choice for themselves, and whether it's, it's just this idea that like, well, they have to do this or they have to do this. And then because of that, they didn't file this paperwork in the right time. And then, you know, I think that nuance and and like autonomy is really lost in a lot of that conversation. I feel like just like on the grand scheme of things, if you really look at it, it's just a bunch of Americans making decisions for a bunch of people they don't know. And, like, the idea that we think that that's just, like, normal and okay is a little strange to me. Now, obviously, each country has its own rules, and that's, like, a reality, and there needs to be those rules. I'm so aware of that. But just, like, accepting that these are individuals who are capable of autonomous decisions and they aren't just coming in, like, clicking their fingers gleefully, like, "Imma do this the most illegal way I can." I think that that nuance is kind of lost in the conversation a lot because it has to be very black or white to make a good media story.
That is a really interesting point, and it's so rare, I think, for anyone, mm, but especially those who don't really have the privilege of, having access to these spaces where you can talk to, people involved. But to actually be able to get the perspective of someone who has been on the ground, has worked with these families, I feel like that certainly changes your perspective. And it's so easy to, whether you talked about kind of the two black and white generalizations, which of course, like you mentioned, are generalizations, but I think they're umbrella generalizations that pretty well fit the two political sides, right? All or none. And I'm curious, like, do you think you would, if more people in charge of making immigration law, uh, commenting on immigration on cable television, if they actually had to go on the ground, say in Mexico City, and see what these circumstances were actually like, do you think that their opinions would likely become more complicated and nuanced, maybe shift?
I wanna say yes, and I think that there's a lot of politicians, and I tend to villainize politicians just like everyone else, and so I taking a step back from that, I think that when you are presented with a human being as an individual, I do think that that's the biggest lesson you can learn. I think it's a little sad that that has to be the biggest lesson you can learn, and we should be willing to take these stories at face value when we hear them. We shouldn't have to be, you know, presented with the mauled body of a child to understand the horror of what could truly be happening. But I will say we are at a point in society where that is truly, I think, sometimes the only way that people really get anything. You know what I mean? So I think that if a lot of politicians actually had to sit there and listen from start to finish someone's whole story of what has happened to them and why they are in the situation that they are in, I do think even if it didn't change someone's minds, I think it would open up policy to a lot more nuance and gray area, because I think it would create a more vibrant picture of what that actually means
Mm.
to be a migrant, what it actually means to be a refugee, what it actually means to like sit down and step by step go through the entire system to become a naturalized citizen in America, I've had to look at all the paperwork from the asylum process to the refugee process to the process of, well, I have this person who can be a sponsor, but now we're questioning whether their status is going to be considered like valid or not, that kind of thing. The nuance that goes into that, the tiny details, the easy ways to suddenly become the villain of the system because you didn't sign this right paper at this right time, and now everything you've worked for in your life is shot because you didn't understand this paperwork or this person when they told you something because English is not your first language. And that kind of thing. I think if you forced a politician to actually apply to be an American citizen, I don't think any of them would make it. So I think that that would create, even if it didn't change someone's mind, I think it would create a more depth of hopefully compassion, but at least nuance in the system.
Hmm. Yeah, thinking about compassion, I heard earlier today, I was listening to, I can't remember what, but I heard a quote that said, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. And kind of thinking about how we deal with political disagreements in this country. You're the first guest I've wanted to ask this, or, I've gotten the chance to ask this, but if you can imagine yourself, maybe you're speaking, someone who's watching this disagrees with everything you're saying, right? If you when you're having political disagreements with someone, what is one thing or what would you want them to understand about where you're coming from? Right? If you're really trying to help them understand, you're not trying to convince them,
Mhm.
but what would you want them to understand about your viewpoint, your worldview, and your views on issues such as immigration or anything else you care about?
Yeah. I think for me, my biggest thing that I would want to communicate to someone, and the biggest thing I try to, because, as a very leftist type person from a very conservative family, Thanksgiving's not always easy, things like that. I really live out the meme of that, but I think that just like the idea that my politics don't come from an idea that I want to hurt you. My politics come from an idea where you and I, maybe, let's say I'm talking to another white person that might be that might be very conservative or something like that. Like, we come from a similar area, maybe of privilege and stuff like that. And the idea that there are other people in this world who don't. And, that's just a reality. And maybe I might have less privilege than you in a certain sense, or you might have more. And like, that's a whole debate that you can discuss with anyone that you want. But thinking that just because someone else wants an equal share of the pie doesn't mean you get less pie. It just means that we just need to make pie for everyone. And so just like, I know that's like a very like weird analogy for it, but just the idea that like just because someone we want someone else to have equal access and equal opportunity for something doesn't mean you don't get to have that anymore. It means that we're trying to create a world that's better for everyone. And that doesn't mean you get less.
Mm. When you've mentioned the utility and like the usefulness of having empathy and leading with empathy throughout this conversation. Do you see a lot of empathy in American politics today?
I think that there is empathy in the sense that we are all human beings. And I think that some people may have a bit of a compassion bias. They can only have empathy for someone they relate to.
Hmm.
And that's hard. But their empathy is still valid in that it still exists because they're human beings. I think that empathy could be more widespread because the thing you have in common is that you're a person.
Hmm.
Not just because they may be someone from your political party, someone from your religious background, that kind of a thing. Um, that doesn't negate that their feelings and empathy is valid. It just means that they have a very closed-minded perspective of what constitutes someone worth valuing.
Mhm.
And I would also say that there is a way that you can weaponize empathy, and I think that that is oftentimes used in politics as well, and I don't necessarily I think it's a valuable weapon at times, but I think that that is a misuse of empathy because empathy is just a natural human experience, and you should want other people to live successful and dignified lives. That's not a crime, and that shouldn't be considered a weakness to want other people to be successful, to live an equitable and dignified life. That's just a human thought, and it shouldn't be considered to be aligned with any political background, political doctrine, theological background. It should just be all of our core values, and it shouldn't be something that should be weaponized to make one side look bad or the other look weird or weak or soft. I think it should just be. But that's just me.
Yeah, we've known each other 3 or 4 years now, for, like, truly known each other, and,
Yeah, I would say 3 years.
yeah, and, throughout the course of me knowing you, obviously you were a student, but, you've always been doing some sort of volunteer work or, volunteer-like work, right? It might be work you're getting paid for, but it's work that's community-based, right? It's
Mm.
service-based, and that work can be exhausting, I would imagine. So what keeps you
Yes.
motivated? What keeps you motivated and, staying off the overwhelming, pushback against, that motivation?
Yeah, burnout is so real. Anyone who's in the public service, in the helping services knows that burnout is so real. And part of it is because you're expected to love the job simply because you're helping people. And I think that's a big thing that we all love the job because we are hopefully creating an environment where people can feel safe.
Mhm.
That being said, that doesn't make it any less hard. um, so I think for me, I mean, a big thing that keeps me I think there's 2 things. One thing that keeps me motivated to keep doing the job, and one thing that helps me sustain the lifestyle, quote unquote, my sustain my abilities to keep doing the job. To sustain myself, I need a lot of external support. I'm not currently in therapy because I just moved back to the US and insurance is hard, but having access to a therapist is key. Also, my oldest sister and my other 2 sisters too, they're big supports for me. If I need a minute, I can just talk to them, things like that. That's a big one. And also making sure that the organizations you're a part of are deeply rooted in like community support and team support for themselves. The current job that I'm working in, I love because my other co teachers are extremely supportive and they're willing to just sit down and like zero judgment, workshop issues, things like that. And so having like a community support around you, not just external support, and really valuing working in organizations that put a big emphasis on being a part, like an entrenched part of the community, I think is really important. Um, and as for what keeps me motivated, I do a lot of work with kids. And I think that there's just something about working with someone who is the future that really just makes me hopeful. And also, kids are just cool. They love without judgment. They have a very unique perspective on the world no matter what they've been through. And just getting to hang out with them and I have hung out with many a kid this last year that does not speak either of the languages I speak and still feeling like I'm having a full conversation with them because they don't know that I don't speak their language. They just talk to me. And just things like that and being able to have those moments of like unfiltered joy no matter what's going on, I think that keeps me really motivated as well.
Yeah, we're talking about the importance of community and feeling listened to, feeling accepted. And I think this is something that a lot of people lack right now in this country.
when it relates to politics and political discussions, especially on places like college campuses where, you know, they're hotbeds for political activism, political conversation and dialogue. I think there's a lot of people who don't feel like they have community, right? People that maybe they're not looking for a community of agreeers, but they're looking for a community of listeners, a community of people who um, will truly let them feel heard. And so, given that the purpose of this project is to foster dialogue and respectful dialogue at that, what advice would you give, maybe to yourself, but to anyone listening here? And I ask every guest this question because I think it's the most important question. What could we all be doing better in our daily lives to promote that respectful dialogue?
Oof. I mean, yeah. That's something that I maybe not respectful dialogue, but there are days where there are certain people that I just can't talk to because I need to protect my own mental health in terms of I feel certain topics, particularly like immigration, can set me off more than others. I mean, you know me, I'm not quiet. We've been through enough in class debates together. And I've definitely, since college, found more ways to express myself in a more leveled manner. Um, and I think that also listening doesn't always mean you have to comment. Listening doesn't, and unless someone is insulting or verbally or physically harming like a social group that's around you or something like that, or a social group that is any social group, actually, honestly, anything, any social group, if they're just talking and it's not actually physically causing harm to anyone else and you may not agree with them, you don't have to respond. You don't necessarily have to say anything to validate your feelings in that conversation because that conversation can just be an experience of that person being heard and you listening to them. You can maybe throw out a comment of like, "Have you thought about this further?" But listening to someone doesn't always mean that you have to put yourself in an emotionally vulnerable position to have that conversation. You can just listen and allow that person to feel heard in the moment. And I think that that's something that has really helped me in conversations, particularly with family members, because I've just gotten more progressive with time and they've gotten more conservative with time, and that's okay. That's a reality that I live in, and it's uncomfortable a lot of the time, but we sit in that discomfort um, because I still want to be invited to Christmas. So I think just allowing people to speak, and as long as they're not being openly like aggressive about a lot of things, because I do have boundaries there. And also creating boundaries, then maybe if you want to have a relationship with someone, but there is one topic that the two of you cannot seem to stop arguing about, there's always a time and place where you can say, "This is how I feel about this topic. This is how I'm hearing you feel about this topic. I don't think it's healthy for us to continue this any longer, like
Mhm.
this conversation." And keeping certain conversations, I know there's a lot of people in my life that I can't talk to about immigration because of their views, and it genuinely tends to set me off in a certain way, I guess. And I can't have a healthy and respectful conversation with them about it at times. And so I've just kind of mentally made that boundary and sometimes verbally with them made that boundary that I can't talk to them about that.
Mhm.
And I think that you shouldn't do that about everything because we have to be brave and sit in discomfort, even if it sucks. But there are certain boundaries you just got to make in this life. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I think remembering that it's your life and it's okay to disagree, but also keeping in the back of your head, I know, as it should be, kindness is a virtue, right? We we tell ourselves to be kind, we encourage kindness, but just because we have respectful political discourse does not mean that you have to be everyone's best friend. Like
hmm
you can choose to still be a good contributor to civil discourse by, not shouting at someone, not calling them a name, but you also don't have to, go be their best friend the next day. And I think if we understand that and if we see that, like, yeah, you don't have to associate with people that, I think that's a much better way to get to than, verbal shouting matches, a name calling, or, God forbid, but physical violence. The last question I want to ask you
Mhm.
is if you could leave the audience with one thought about the country's future or the world's future, depending on kind of where your mind's at, what would that one thought be?
Hmm. Ooh, that's such a good question, Daniel. I don't know. Let me think.
I will
One.
let me share while you
Yes,
while
please.
yeah. So if there was one thought that I think needs to be heard from my perspective more now than anything else, and there's a lot of things that deserve attention, but
Mhm.
given the political landscape in this country, I view the situation to be so dire in terms of how bad our civil discourse and civic engagement has gotten in this country. I think that it's now or never, and it's our responsibility to work from the bottom up because unfortunately, a sad fact about the climate we live in is that our leaders aren't going to do this, right? Our leaders in DC aren't going to just start being kind to each other all of a sudden. I think it's
Mm,
a change that we have to make, and it's a change that starts one person at a time. You know, it's how you treat your neighbor who has a different view than you. It's how you treat your, you know, brother or sister, whoever it is that you have diverging opinions on. That this is the one thought I would leave the audience with is I think we are moving in a direction so toxic to democracy that if we don't make a change now, it might be too late. Which can be both a really hopeful message, right? In the sense that we can still make a change, but it's
mhm,
also a very depressing thought, right? Are we already too far gone to save ourselves? I would like to think no, but that's where I'm at.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's a big one. And I think that, yeah, I will say just like coming back into being a more active participant in American politics. Um, okay, yes, okay. I've formulated this now. I think that, as an outsider perspective for the last year, watching things like I was genuinely shocked by the sheer presence of like the No Kings protests in when was that June? Was that June?
Hmm.
Yeah. And things like that and seeing people genuinely go out of their way to speak out. And I think that I've seen a lot recently of people taking action, being more involved in community development, being more involved in politics, whether it's on for politics I believe in or a different set, that's okay. I think that there is obviously a growing sense of radicalism in a lot of youth right now. And I would say that that is a product of the very partisan environment we have created in our country. And I think that the biggest thing that I would say is a takeaway right now as a someone who is probably still considered a youth in general senses. I'm still pretty young.
We're young. We're hip.
I only have mac and cheese and grapes in my fridge right now. Like I'm young. But I think that understanding that your actions and your voice matter and if you don't feel like you are a valued part of your community, create that community then because no one's going to do it for you. And I think that we have created a environment in our country where people just kind of throw their hands up and are like, which I get it because politics in the last like since I've been aware of it, so probably the last like 8 years. Oh my god, is it exhausting? I'm so tired. And like the idea that, everyone's just kind of thrown their hands up and they're like, there's nothing else that can be done. But there is. we still live in a democracy as of right now, and we have power. And if you sell yourself short and you don't participate in the communities around you, you are creating your own demise and you are taking away your own voice. Granted, many of our rights and voices might be in the future taken from us or right now are being suppressed in certain ways, but that doesn't mean you stop. Even if it's exhausting, I think that the end goal is worth it and that your voice has value and your rights and your community is worth it. So that is the thought I would say to take away.
Very nicely put. Um, as always, I encourage people listening to this to engage. If there was a something said that particularly interests you throughout this conversation, leave a comment, join the conversation. That's what gets the job done, and that's what creates a more civic-minded conversation. But as I always say, do it with the presumption of grace. You're
Mm,
not always going to agree with everything a guest says. So give them the presumption of grace that they are not coming at you with their perspective from the worst possible place, but from a human place. Emily, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a privilege. Keep doing the awesome work you're doing.
yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for letting me come on and talk to you about politics. So